Today our topic is Pedagogy of the Oppressed, which is a famous book, influential one, written by Paulo Freire. Here we find Paulo Freire distinguishing between two pedagogies, pedagogy of the oppressor and pedagogy of the oppressed. The method which is pursued in the pedagogy of the oppressor, he calls it banking method of education, where, to Freire, teachers are bank clerks in the sense that they make deposits of education, deposits of knowledge, in fact, in the minds of students. And students are mere passive receptacles. They passively receive knowledge and information from the teachers, and they just receive, memorize, and repeat. And this cycle continues, which means that the students in the pedagogy of the oppressor, they do not question, they do not criticize, they do not challenge the existing knowledge. And the culture in the classroom, in the pedagogy of the oppressor, the culture is the culture of authoritarianism, in which there is a monologue from the teacher and it is not a dialogue between the student and the teacher. So this is one-way communication, more or less. And culture of silence, it prevails in the classroom. So classroom is not what it should be to Freire. It should be an intellectual center where minds meet, where teacher and student, they freely communicate. And the students, they should not only be required to answer questions, they should also be, in fact, encouraged to question answers, because the answers are not the final ones. They can also be questioned. This is how knowledge unfolds itself gradually. So the teacher can either be a liberator or can be a domesticator. In the pedagogy of the oppressor, the teacher is not a liberator, but a domesticator who domesticates students, and therefore they become a part of a system of larger oppression which is going on in the society. And the students, through the pedagogy of the oppressor, they become mere tools, and the teacher himself or herself becomes a mere tool. For Paulo Freire, teacher is essentially a politician, whether he or she recognizes it or not. He or she, in fact, is a politician. In what sense a teacher is a politician? In the sense that teacher constructs and shapes the individual and the society through the social action that we call education. Therefore, a teacher should be very conscious of his role, whether he or she is promoting critical consciousness, social justice, democracy, or he is or she is making the students merely tools of the powerful. And the teacher is domesticating students in accordance with the demands of the powerful classes of the society. Some people, the students, I mean, if they are just domesticated, they will not be capable of developing critical consciousness. Critical consciousness is a very significant idea in Paulo Freire's view of pedagogy of the oppressed. So students are not able to develop critical consciousness, which means that they, if they are not given liberty in the classroom, they do not challenge and question oppression and social justice and prevailing inequality in the society. So teacher can either be as a politician, whether he or she knows or does not know, he or she is either a liberator or a domesticator, according to Paulo Freire. And in the pedagogy of the oppressor, there is a contradiction between the relationship of teacher and student. Teacher becomes an oppressor, in fact, a sub-oppressor. He or she himself is being oppressed by a larger system, and in the classroom, he oppresses the student. This contradiction, Paulo Freire argues, should be resolved, and it can be resolved if education becomes the practice of freedom in the classroom. This is how Paulo Freire views, and he distinguishes between two different pedagogies. So one pedagogy is the banking concept of education, which is pedagogy of the oppressor, and the other pedagogy is the dialogical method, where teacher and student, they argue, or they in a way become co-creators of knowledge, where students can raise questions, where students do not only answer questions, but they can also question answers. So this is the basic difference. So we shared some of the key differences of these two pedagogies with you. Now let's move on to some of the criticisms against Paulo Freire. Even though some of those criticisms are not direct criticisms on Paulo Freire, but they are criticisms on his pedagogy. This is not a new, entirely new recommendation made by Paulo Freire. As some scholars, they rightly say that he is a successor, intellectual successor in pedagogy. He is successor of Rousseau, famous French philosopher and educationist. Now let's see what Bertrand Russell has to say on a Rousseauian system of education. Bertrand Russell, which will also be a criticism, at least partially, of Paulo Freire's pedagogy of the oppressed, which he proposes and which he strongly advocates. So I quote from Bertrand Russell: "The belief that liberty will ensure moral perfection is a relic of Rousseauism." If we believe that liberty will on itself lead to the moral perfection of the student, it is a relic of Rousseauism, which means that Rousseau believed that it will happen, but it will not happen. According to Bertrand Russell, he says that, and this belief would not survive a study of animals and babies. If we apply this test on animals and babies, Russell claims that this will not prove to be true. Further, he says, Bertrand Russell, those who hold this belief think that education should have no positive purpose, but should merely offer an environment suitable for spontaneous development. I cannot agree with this school of thought. Russell further says, I cannot agree with this school, which seems to me too individualistic and unduly indifferent to the importance of knowledge. This school of thought, to Bertrand Russell, ignores the significance of knowledge because it can be so, it in fact is so in so many cases, that teacher knows the best of knowledge, where the world is now, for example, in terms of knowledge in a particular subject, the teacher knows it and he transforms it to the students. Okay, we will further discuss it. So, according to Bertrand Russell, Bertrand Russell cannot agree with this school of thought, which seems to me, he says, too individualistic and unduly indifferent to the importance of knowledge. We live in communities which require cooperation, and it would be utopian to expect all the necessary cooperation to result from spontaneous impulse. It will all not result from spontaneous impulse, but there should be discipline and there should be some degree of authority of the teacher in the classroom. This is what it implies. Let's proceed. He further says, Bertrand Russell, the educators who allow most freedom are men whose success depends upon a degree of benevolence, self-control, and trained intelligence, which can hardly be generated where every impulse is left unchecked. Their merits, therefore, are not likely to be perpetuated if their methods are undiluted. Now these merits, unquote, these merits, benevolence, self-control and trained intelligence, which a teacher possesses, which an educator possesses, these virtues or these merits will not perpetuate, they will not be inculcated, they will not become a part of the personality of the students, these virtues or these merits, if we use Ferrare's method that he called pedagogy of the oppressed, which for some is a libertarian method, for some critics it is even anarchic or it has anarchic results. Okay, another quote from Bertrand Russell from another book where he says, progressive educators such as John Dewey, Paulo Freire and Rousseau, progressive educators in the West have, I think, been inclined to generate self-importance in the child and to let him feel himself a little aristocrat whom adults must serve. This leads him to grow up an anarchist, impatient of the restraints of social life. And the result is that such students, they do not feel that they are a unit in a larger society, and they do not understand fully that they have a duty to the community also. Okay, let's move on to our next criticism. Ibn Khaldun, for example, a very famous philosopher and historian and also an educationist, he distinguishes between authoritarian and authoritative teacher. If we look upon the pedagogy of the oppressed, we understand that teacher is understood to belong to either of two categories. He or she is either an authoritarian teacher or almost a libertarian teacher, which seem to be two extremes. Ibn Khaldun tells us that a teacher is not necessarily either authoritarian teacher or a libertarian teacher. He or she can be authoritative teacher also, who possesses excellence in his or her field of study. And excellence does not mean that what he knows, the degree of knowledge that he possesses, or the excellence of knowledge that he possesses or he holds, that is a final word. It does not mean that his knowledge is final word. Obviously, there is room for more and more knowledge, always. But still, in the existing world, he possesses a level of expertise which should be recognized. So Ibn Khaldun says, or this is his view, that the more the students interact with authoritative teachers, they learn more from authoritative teachers than from books. Even if you have to travel, students have to travel, for example, to meet such authoritative teachers, obviously they should go for that. They should travel and interact with them. And the more they interact with the authoritative teachers, the more excellence they attain, and the scientific habit is cultivated in such students who interact with authoritative teachers. To Ibn Khaldun. This was our second criticism. Let's move on to our third criticism. This criticism is based on Immanuel Kant's view of enlightenment, which is very popular world over. As we know, to Immanuel Kant, enlightenment means coming out of self-imposed immaturity. Now it can be contrasted with Ferrare's view. For Ferrare, immaturity is not self-imposed, but the system, the powerful, the dominant classes, the dominant people, they are entirely responsible for the immaturity of the masses, of the students, or even of the teachers. As for Paulo Freire, teachers are sub-oppressors. They themselves are being oppressed by other oppressors over them, and they are oppressing students, according to Paulo Freire. But for Immanuel Kant, immaturity is not imposed by some outward forces. It is essentially people themselves who are responsible for their immaturity. Now, the basic problem here is that Ferrari does not distinguish between free will as a metaphysical concept and free will as a political concept. For example, if in a conference or in a seminar, all people, they are encouraged to participate, but still some people do not participate. That means that they are metaphysically free and even politically free, but they have not chosen to participate. They have not exercised their metaphysical free will, even though political freedom is there. Political freedom simply means the absence of outside restraints. And metaphysical free will means, or free will in the metaphysical sense, that means someone's inner ability to choose between the options. So, Ferrari does not distinguish between these two concepts and tends to confuse them.